The ugly is Eli Wallach, a wild spirit with a devilish attitude. Tuco is charming but extremely dangerous. The pairing of Eastwood and Wallach is memorable for its black humor alternating each other's fate, motivated satisfactorily by their excessive desire for collecting the reward money. The quest. A treasure chest containing $200,000 in gold buried in a Confederate grave in Sad Hill Cemetery. The good, the bad and the ugly had many haunting moments, complicated bounty hunters' con games. The stranger, in a frantic hurry, trying to load his empty gun before three killers sent by Tuco, a tortoise walk across the desert in a blazing sun, the epic battle between Union and Confederate soldiers for the control of a strategic bridge where Leone's camera takes a slow ride surveying the magnitude of the Civil War carnage, and the final showdown in a huge graveyard, where each character, naturally, wants the money all to himself. The amusing scenes are provided by Tuco, sitting in a bathtub with a lot of foam and one armed man enters his room saying, "I've been looking for you for 8 months. Now I find you in exactly the position that suits me." The memorable scenes are when the stranger finds himself in a dangerous situation at the hand of Tuco, who is just about to collect his vengeance by hanging his former partner. The stunning scenes when Leone's camera captures the touching moment in which a young man plays sweet romantic songs on his harmonica, while his eyes are streaming tears of disgrace and grief. The unforgettable scenes when the stranger leaves Tuco with a rope around his neck and the bandit begs for mercy while teetering on a wooden cross. The ultimate confrontation between the forces of good and evil when Leone spreads out long shots adjusting sound with action. Tensions mount as the three protagonists shape in a triangular cinema cliché. Leone gets the audience's imagination with a geometric fight to the death, accompanied by clear exciting music. Leone's camera captures every straight line, every nervous energy, every tactical movement, displaying, in huge close-ups, their faces, their power of vision, the slow progress of their fingers toward their loaded guns, their worried eyes, their sudden need to be quick, to be the fastest draw. I know some movie fans who consider The Good, the Bad and the Ugly the best movie ever made. While I don't even think it's the best thing Sergio Leone made, it's a solid spaghetti western that has all but transcended the subgenre. There are images, such as Clint Eastwood in the poncho, and music, like the main title theme, that are known by people who have never seen the movie. I also know people who wouldn't be caught dead watching a movie made outside of the USA who love The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. I can't think of another Italian-made film, let alone an Italian-made Western, that has become so universally known and enjoyed. There are so many moments in The Good, the Bad and the Ugly that I enjoy. One of my favorites is that of Tuco running through the cemetery as Morricone's "The Ecstasy of Gold" plays in the background. It literally gives me goosebumps. It's one of those movie moments that I look forward to no matter how many times I've seen them. I'm also a fan of the techniques Leone used in The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. Leone's use of the widescreen shots of the landscape intercut with extreme close-ups of faces is brilliant. It adds a sense of intimacy to the vastness of the setting that allows the viewer to feel like they're part of the movie and gain some insight into the characters. It's a technique that very few other filmmakers have the guts to employ. But I sincerely doubt that Leone's film would be so widely and wildly regarded if it weren't for the music of Ennio Morricone. I've already mentioned the main title theme and The Ecstasy of Gold, but these are only two examples found in this amazing score. Can you imagine the final showdown without Morricone's music? I can't think of many instances where music and film go together to create such tension and anticipation. I've already used the word brilliant to describe Leone, but it's also applicable to Morricone. Finally, The Good, the Bad and the Ugly wouldn't be the same without the three lead actors. Each, at least in this movie, is brilliant, there's that word again, in his own right. Clint Eastwood is the good. He's the good, in the sense that he's not as bad as the other two. Lee Van Cleef is the bad. He's a ruthless killer who would just as soon shoot you as look at you, as long as the price was right. And then there's Eli Wallach as the ugly. As good as Eastwood and Van Cleef are, Wallach is really something special. Wallach's Tuco is one of the most crazed, but complicated characters I've seen. It's a special cast for a very special movie. Rather than a review of a 30-year-old movie, here is my recollection of a 30-year-old movie. When was the first time you saw this movie? I remember the first time I saw this movie. Back in the 70s, one night there were two things on TV to choose from, this movie or a baseball game. How do I remember a baseball game? It was the night Hank Aaron was going after Babe Ruth's home run record. Baseball or a movie? Tuned into the baseball game, flipped to the movie a western, cool. What is this no one is talking about, it makes no sense. After what seemed like an eternity somebody finally spoke, Lee Van Cleef. The rest is movie history. Since then I have seen this movie well over 25 times. Numerous lines that have been etched into my memory. Forget whatever minor flaws this movie has. Put yourself in the movie. Sergio Leone, John Ford, these are the people that defined the Western. On a scale of 1 to 10, the good, the bad, and the ugly is nothing less than a 10. Plop the tape into the VCR, sit back and experience a classic. Okay, first, as mentioned in another review, the geographic, historical errors in this film are glaring. You've got men carrying revolvers that look like old-style cap and ball pistols, but they're loading them with metallic cartridges historically about 5 years early. Eastwood carries a rifle that hasn't been invented yet. Tuco assembles a super pistol out of a Colt, a Remington, and a Smith & Wesson Impossible. And there was nothing of merit taking place between the North and South during the Civil War in the Southwest. Now, that aside, I must say that this is the greatest Western ever. I first saw this film when I was about 10. I'd never sat through an entire Western, even though my dad watched them constantly. Since then, I've been through film school, watched hundreds of Westerns, learned to appreciate them, but nothing matches up to this. The Searchers, Stagecoach, Gunfight at the OK Corral, The Gunfighter, High Noon, Shane, all great films, but saddled with the standard American Western morality: the good guy never takes liberties with the Eastern schoolmarm, the bad guy wears a black hat, etc. Coming from Italy, TGTB2 isn't bound by these conventions. Blondie's the good guy, but he's also a bounty hunter. He makes a living in a highly immoral way, but is obviously the good, not because we're told, but from small acts: giving the dying soldier a cigar, making sure the captain knows to hold on till he hears the bridge blow, the genuine regret he feel for having to let Shorty die. And while Angel Eyes may be the bad, we at least know he has principles. When he's hired for a job, he always sees the job through. And Tuco may be more immoral than the other two, but he's so savvy and his role so humorous that one can't bring oneself to look upon him disfavorably. In other words, historical inaccuracies aside, TB, and 2 may be one of the most accurate portrayals of the West ever put on film. There are no clear-cut lines of conduct, no black and white, or even gray, but just a swirled palette of various facets of the human condition. Belfast-based comics writer Garth Ennis said it best: "There are two kinds of people in the world, my friend. Those who dig Clint Eastwood movies, and dweebs." While I have to admit that my heart belongs to the opening act of The Man with No Name trilogy, A Fistful of Dollars, there is no denial in my mind that the good, the bad, and the ugly is actually the better film. Many directors have tried imitating its style, including Don Siegel's substandard Hang 'em High, and Eastwood's own first Western offering as star director in High Plains Drifter, but none have truly come close to the eccentricities on display here. I have a suspicion that the storyline is actually based on historical fact. Consider this account from Joel Rose's The Big Book of Thugs, under the entry of the Reynolds Gang. They were organized in 1863 by Texans Jim and John Reynolds. They were briefly interned in a Civil War prison camp for Confederate sympathizers, and after being released, began making robberies that, according to Jim Reynolds, were to help out Jefferson Davis and the Confederacy. The loot was buried somewhere in the area of Handcart, Gulch, and Spanish Peaks in Colorado Territory, and later, after Jim Reynolds and 4 members of his gang had been executed by Colonel John M. Chivington of the Union Army, John Reynolds, dying from a fatal wound during a holdup, supposedly whispered out the location of his old gang's ill-gotten loot. Unlike the movie version, it was never found. Regardless of whether or not this was the actual basis for TGTBATU, it is nevertheless a film more grounded in history than a lot of its contemporaries and, indeed, more than a few of its successors. The Civil War is part of the backdrop, but it does so on a forgotten front of that war, the Western theater. Most high school history classes would have us believe that nothing happened out west, but plenty did. In fact, the last skirmish of the war, if I'm not mistaken, was in New Mexico and, ironically enough, a Confederate victory.